Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Preview series of interviews with top business and technology experts. I'm Dana Kohut, and today I'm delighted to welcome Joni Klippert, who is CEO and co-founder at StackHawk, a company that built a robust tool for API security. Joni, thank you so much for taking the time to join me today. It's an honor to have you with us.
Oh, thank you so much. It's my pleasure.
Joni, I'd like to start off our conversation with you maybe introducing yourself to our listeners and viewers. Tell us a little bit more about yourself and the steps in your career and your decision to start StackHawk.
Sure. So my name is Joni Klippert, CEO and co-founder of StackHawk. I've grown my career in technology largely in a product capacity. So for the last 15 years, I've been building software for software engineers in the DevOps ecosystem, largely at very small startups. So as like seed to A is usually when I joined teams. My first startup, they accepted me even though I was a non-technical person. And it was a very technical startup, and that's where I got to cut my teeth in technology. And there I was doing customer development. So understanding the technology we had built, making sure to kind of map out the market and the different pain points that customers were having kind of in the space and different solutions that were being created in the space so that we could sort of appropriately both build and position the company appropriately. So that was a lot of fun, and it was a huge gift, I think, because to get to spend 3 years learning a lot about something that you don't currently know and get paid for it is awesome. And then after that, I ran product at a company called VictorOps. Mm-hmm. We were a competitor to PagerDuty. And at that business, the whole thesis was, okay, we're in with DevOps, which people still didn't really know what it was at the time. It was like, can I buy some from you? And I was like, this is not a thing you can just buy, but we can help you. But at that point, we were delivering software to production so quickly. This idea that humans sitting in a network operations center would be the appropriate ones to get the alerts about downtime and then try to fix them was no longer really holding true because they'd never seen the code before. And so that was all about shipping alerts about uptime and performance of our runtime systems directly to the software engineers that had written the code. That company was acquired by Splunk in 2018 and was a really wonderful ride. And during those last two companies that I talked about, I had an opportunity to not only have a slate of awesome mentors and CEOs that really believed in me and gave me a lot of opportunity, but also really awesome investor relationships that I had built with our board members. And that gave me the opportunity, the exit with Splunk, to step back and think about what I wanted to do. And it was an opportunity for me to found a company as a first-time founder. And that was going to be StackHawk. So StackHawk is my first foray into cybersecurity. But really, I feel like the problem we're solving is just an extension of digital transformation problems that we've been solving in DevOps for a really long time.
Yeah, that sounds absolutely amazing. And specifically the part that you recognize that you are not a technical person, but you had the courage to work in the high-tech industry and build your own company. So I believe that for many listeners, and specifically women in tech, that would be a huge inspiration. Usually I do ask this question at the end of the interview, but here it's just like they naturally pop up. So what are your hard-won lessons as a woman in tech?
I would just say be really curious. Like either you are or you aren't. I don't know if curiosity is something you can make people feel, but when you're curious and you ask why a lot, you'll have the ability to learn really fast. And so I feel like I had a little bit of a leg up because I didn't know much about the space at all. That first startup we were talking about it was essentially the equivalent of what's built today as like a low-code, no-code platform. And we were programmatically deploying all different kinds of open source applications on all these different cloud providers and managing them on different clouds. And I didn't know anything about the internets or how they worked or how you programmatically deploy applications or the kind of the personalities of all of the different like coding languages. Like a PHP conference is very different from a Rails conference, is different from, all these different types of languages you might go to. But just hanging out with a lot of these open source communities and asking a lot of questions about how they did their jobs. And a lot of people want to help. And so I think it's important not to be afraid to ask. I think people fear looking stupid when they ask a question. I mean, I'll never forget when I realized what a LAMP stack was, because I kept hearing Linux, Apache, MySQL, PHP over and over in a different order. And then I just started giggling when I figured out, oh, okay, now I know what this is. But it's just silly nerd jokes. But just be comfortable asking questions, because so many people will help you. And then you'll just get really comfortable. And tech can feel scary, but people are people, and technology isn't actually that hard to figure out. There's a mentor I have that we talk about. We push a lot of women into STEM, thinking that's the most appropriate way that we can grow our careers in technology. And one, I think it's awesome. I love hiring female engineers. I want to see more female engineers. But STEM is not necessarily an equivalent to leadership. And it's not that hard to understand if you ask a lot of questions and through deductive reasoning, what we're building, why we're building it, who it's for, and if this is the right thing that we should be doing next. So happy to take that in any other direction you want to take it, but those are a few comments.
No, Johnny, that is fascinating. I like the part about curiosity, being able to show vulnerability and show that you don't know everything, but you are open to learn, which is great. So, learning about tech and also launching your own company that is successful, that got a great customer base, is a whole new level. So what does StackHawk do, and for who is the tool for?
Yeah, so StackHawk is at this point, I would call us like a shift left API security platform. So the product we went to market with in 2020, we founded the company in 2019 on an idea and a team, and quickly went to work building software. The product is API security testing, was the very first product. And the way that we test APIs is through DAST. It's called Dynamic Application Security Testing. And for a lot of folks on this call, you can think about, an enterprise organization, or really any organization selling to other enterprises. When you're checking off your list of SOC 2 things you need to do, a lot of folks would get a pen test. And a pen tester would use something like DAST to test a running application for vulnerabilities. And then they would create a report, PDF report, and they hand it over to the organization. And back when we founded the company, that was largely it. And then you were done until the next 6 months or the next year. And I was like, this is so intellectually dishonest. Like, we are shipping code so fast. Like, that report is out of date by the time the ink is dry. So it's time to actually automate this kind of testing. And in doing a lot of research with CISOs and other VPs of engineering, and I would ask them about this capability and this technology, and they would say, gosh, if you could automate DAST, that would be amazing. And I was like, okay, I'm not that smart. Why is nobody automating DAST? Everybody just told me this. This seems like a really big pain point. Let's figure this out. So it's again, it attacks your application like an attacker would. And the way that we think about this is that we need to give this information to software engineers as they're writing code. So it is not good enough to do this in production and 6 months later throw a bunch of tickets over the wall to engineering and say you have vulnerabilities to fix. I mean, one, that's wildly expensive. Two, those vulnerabilities have been in production for a long time, so that's increasing risk. And three, your engineers are like, I haven't even seen this code in 6 months. And I've made promises to my customers. I deliver business value. So now I have to go back and fix all of these vulnerabilities. So we're like, this is broken. And so we very much focused on changing what was legacy DAST that tested, this is a little bit nerdy, but front-end applications that were all browser-based. And we changed it in a world where we have single-page, long scrolling applications that are all backed by APIs. And so we test the API layer directly. It runs in CI/CD, and we're able to give that feedback about new vulnerabilities directly to the software engineer who's written that code as they're in flow of writing and delivering code. So the cost and the interruption of fixing that vulnerability is really, really small. as compared to what it is after it's been sitting in
Mhm.
production for a long time. So we're very developer focused on our testing. And as we've gone up market, so where the kind of platform comes in, we realized, okay, well, obviously we're like crushing the testing. I'll say that because I think it's a really beautiful and elegant product. But there's a bigger problem in the enterprise and mid-market, which is the CISO is saying, the thing that keeps me up at night is I don't even know where all of my applications and APIs are. And we can start talking a lot more about AI and speed of delivery and speed of release. But we're delivering so many applications, or maybe I'm a company and I've acquired a bunch of other companies and I don't understand those code bases. And so being able to test APIs is really important, but also being able to show organizations what they even have that they need to test is sort of step one on our security hierarchy of needs. And so we built a really cool solution to do that as well. And the whole thing is about bridging security folks with developers so we can do this at the pace of software delivery.
So Dust, and you mentioned there is another solution that you have built that actually shows organization what do they need to test. What is that solution? Can you elaborate on that a little bit more?
Yeah, so it's called API Discovery.
Mm-hmm.
And the way it works is we use a little bit of AI magic, but essentially we think of it as your source code is your source of truth. So today there are companies that will sit on your gateway and they look for traffic on your APIs. They look for anomalous behavior on APIs and they'll send you a little alert, which is important. You know, you want to know if you're currently under attack. And some of those say, well, we can also show you a map of your APIs. But there's a survivorship bias in that way of seeing where your APIs are because they have to be in production and they have to have traffic in order for them to be identified. Okay. But we have a lot of APIs, like really juicy APIs that might be used by our development team, but they contain a ton of data. And you want to make sure that you're testing those APIs as well, or APIs that are speaking to other SaaS products and ensuring that those don't have vulnerabilities. So by saying source code is our source of truth, which it is, you're able to slurp in all of your repositories is how our product works. So whether you're using GitHub or Bitbucket or Azure repos, and then by using AI, we can infer and identify what languages are in each of those repositories and how many of those contained applications or APIs that should be under test with something like StackHawk. So to give you a sense of the magnitude of this problem, when I've asked folks who are really good at rolling out StackHawk and they did it manually, I said, how did you know about all these different microservices that you need to put under test? And they said, I literally embedded myself with engineering for an entire year. And I built a spreadsheet of every single repository, which is never named like what it does. Like maybe it's named after Star Wars or like some other theme in your company. Like ours are all about birds, you know, like a StackHawk. So, you know, you don't, as a security person, you couldn't look at a repository and go, oh, I know what that thing does, you know, in most companies. Mm-hmm. And then they would write, okay, well, this is what it does. This is the team that works on it. This is the technologies it contains. This is the kind of data it handles. And then they would manually put it under test. And that's a point in time assessment that takes like a year because many companies of any size have like 1,000 repositories. And based on the data that we've looked at least 30% of them will have APIs or applications that need to be put under test. So that's a really big problem that we can solve with AI in literally 15 minutes is how long it takes to process 1,000 repositories. So I'm super excited about what we can do with AI now to help automate discovery, automate testing, where it could have been done before, but the amount of code you would have had to write is like insane to solve that problem. And now it can be done super fast with really smart prompts. So that's our new product.
It looks like you are solving a massive challenge and problem to many organizations and developer teams. So this, instead of writing tons of code, now you have a more efficient way of approaching the challenge. In one of your interviews, I was listening prior to our conversation, you mentioned about the ostrich mentality, where a lot of developers are more resistant of, like learning more about their code. But that is something that is being changed. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so two things there. I think when I was talking about ostrich mentality, I was actually talking about the security team.
Okay.
And what can happen is, like, we just talked about the complexity of modern applications,
Yeah.
like hundreds or thousands of microservices, thousands of repositories. And a lot of the technology like ours, the way it works today, is it just scans your website, www dot or app dot, and it's trying to attack it. But it's maybe testing 10 to 30% of your actual application, your APIs. They're largely unauthenticated, but they all provide you with a nice little green checkbox at the end that you did your test. And that's not good enough. I think it's like malpractice to be like, oh, okay, well, good, I got a green checkbox, we're safe. It's like, no. We've actually changed how we build software. You need to thoroughly test these applications, and you should do it before production. And so there's a little bit of, I don't really want to know what we have because then I'm responsible for it. That is the ostrich mentality.
Got it.
What we see in the developer world, and this happened when I was just doing research even on StackHawk. We talked to, what I don't think most people understand is the ratio of developers to security people in a company is about 100 to 1. And the second, and that one, so say 100 engineers, that one security person is not just responsible for AppSec. They're responsible for sort of all information security associated with the business, and maybe even physical security, right? So that's a lot of stuff for one person to handle. They don't have a lot of time. But there's this dynamic that happens that you ask a software engineer about securing their code, and they'll go, oh yeah, we have a security team. They're totally on top of that. And you're like, okay, baby. I'm not sure they are. And it's not their fault, right? They have a lot of jobs. They're trying to fit in a lot to secure the company. It is their responsibility. But there's just sort of this assumption that happens. And I think it's really important for software engineers to realize they don't got this, right? Like there's a lot that we can do to help our security counterparts actually secure the code that we're writing, especially in an AI world, in an API world that's moving really, really quickly. I think in general, a DevOps principle is, there are some toxic engineering cultures, they totally exist, that are, I don't want to do that, it's not my job. But a positive spin on what happens to software engineers is we've given them a great deal of responsibility. They have to write code. They usually deploy their own infrastructure. They are now writing their own unit tests and integration tests for automation. If you were a customer of ours at VictorOps, you are now on call in the middle of the night for the code that you wrote, right? We're just piling responsibility onto our software engineers. And security is one more piece. However, if we are good at our jobs as security professionals, we mitigate noise, because security people are obsessed with like finding a bajillion things, but that's not actually helpful. It's like, what are the 5 most important things that we need to fix today? And if we limit the noise and give actionable information to our developers and integrate with their tool sets, yes, it is one more job, but it's a lot easier to do when in context of writing code than what they experience when it's not automated and it isn't part of their workflow. It's a much more intense experience for them. So I have a lot of empathy for the job, but this is one more thing that it does belong in pipe, and it does belong in the developer's hands.
What kind of features have you been able to build to make sure that your tool is seamlessly integrated into CI/CD pipelines? How easy it is to integrate StackHawk into the existing kind of pipelines?
Yeah. Ooh, I love talking about features. Okay. So for our software engineers, first of all, with DAST, we make it really easy to configure and deploy. So it's configured via a YAML file, which software engineers have a lot of experience with. And then it runs via Docker or via your CLI. So just to get it going, that's a really easy ecosystem for a software engineer to work in. Then when you go to the automation phase, It runs in CI/CD as like a GitHub action or a Circle CI orb or whatever tool that you're using. And we encourage teams to run it on the smallest bits of code possible. So say I'm changing my billing service and that thing is, X number of lines of code. It's a lot easier and fast to run a test on something like that versus like your entire web properties. And so we're talking like a few minutes. And then when they get an alert, you can have it like in a PR comment, for example, in GitHub, so they can see what's happened in pipeline. They can see new vulnerabilities found, and we can even block builds for, if there's a certain service and it has highly sensitive data and we find a new high vulnerability, we can block the build. But for the engineer, we rewrote all of the definitions of vulnerabilities in engineering language. They had been written for security people, and they were totally speaking about things in engineering, but they weren't using engineering words. And so we're like, okay, let's rewrite all of this so that it's contextual. Why does it matter? What is the anti-pattern, or how did I break the framework that I'm using such that this vulnerability occurred? We give tips on how to fix it. We show the request response that came through that shows the error. And then we have a really juicy little curl command that is very easy to rerun, reproduce the issue, fix it, and then get going with your job. Another thing we have, if you're integrated with other SaaS tools, there are a couple of SaaS tools that point out sort of exactly where lines of code there might be vulnerabilities. We can integrate with those tools and show you exactly the line of code you need to go fix. So everything we do is about the developer experience and making it as fast as possible to not only find, but also remediate those vulnerabilities.
I could recognize the 3 pillars of StackHawk product. Is that right? So you talked about discoverability. So you easily allow the teams to easily discover the attack service, right? Test and oversight, right? Prior to being released to prod. What are the key pieces for strong API security program from your standpoint?
Yeah, well, you went over the 3 pillars. So those are big pieces of them. So where StackHawk lives in API security is sort of left of production. So everything we're doing is we're helping you identify your attack surface. And what's really great about that capability is as new repositories and new APIs are being added, you see them even before they're deployed to production. So as a security person, you're like, ooh, the team is working on something new. I want to make sure that we get that under test. So that's really important. And then you need very comprehensive testing. So it's all about testing all of the different API protocol. So SOAP, REST, gRPC, GraphQL, and then making sure that you can scan them at a depth that makes sense. A lot of scanners are kind of dumb. They throw a bunch of data at the input, and it doesn't necessarily test the API as thoroughly as it could if there was contextual data being used in the test. And so that is some of the advancements we've made in the actual testing capability itself, so sort of breadth and depth of test. The oversight piece is about making sure that your program is working. So 1, am I testing all of my attack surface? 2, of the results that we found, am I fixing the right things at the right time? So giving oversight to the security team, because we're asking them to give up a lot of control to devs. We're asking them to automate. We're asking them to let devs take a first pass at remediation and risk. But we have to give that lens to the security team to go, I'm trusting that my program is working as appropriate. So they're paying attention to what's getting fixed. And then they're paying attention to how often are these scans actually running? Are they running at an appropriate cadence for the data that this application handles? So those are the 3 pieces. Now, when you talk about an overall API security solution or program for a larger organization, that also will contain production technologies. So that will include monitoring your production APIs for real-time attacks, and making sure that, and that's where we can play nicely with some of those companies that act more in the prod side and monitoring side, is if you are seeing certain routes or APIs that are getting a lot of attacks, let's feed that information back into the team and make sure it's doubly tested or very proactively tested before it's deployed to production to sort of harden our systems.
Yeah, that's very interesting what you mentioned about the production phase. So, Johnny, would you eventually see StackHawk making a shift right and helping organization in the production, or you'd rather stay in the proactive testing?
I think we'd rather stay in proactive testing and solve the problems associated with shift right through integrations. So, for example, we announced a partnership with Microsoft earlier this year, RSA, in April, and they have a product called Defender for Cloud and Defender for APIs. And so they're very much in that runtime space. Whereas the focus and the capabilities that you need to have to deliver sort of that developer first experience is, I think, a lot different than if you're building products to satisfy a SOC or sort of a very right persona. And trying to do all of them, in my experience, it's difficult, right?
Mm-hmm.
Those are different personas, different buyers. They want different things out of your product. So we are all about integrations and helping to that code to cloud story is what you hear a lot from CNAP providers and other folks that are saying, yes, we want to know it's in prod, but we have to trace that all the way back to the code. And so I think partnerships and integrations are our best way to do that. And I think it's best for the consumer. You want to make sure you're getting the right products and capabilities for the right personas.
Another question is about the customers. I'd like you to talk about one of the cases where your customers were able to leverage your tool and mitigate some of the major challenges. I could see that you got quite a few healthcare organizations as your customers, and healthcare, they are dealing with sensitive data. Any kind of challenges with the application can cause serious issues. So if you could tell us a little bit more about one of the cases where your customers were able to leverage your tool.
So we do a lot of health tech and a lot of fintech that you noticed on our website. And that is because the data that they handle is quite sensitive. Two, a lot of these organizations are trying to sell into other enterprise organizations with, a lot of newer technologies in the health and fintech space. And so when they're able to say to their clients or their customers, we test for security vulnerabilities on every single release, it helps them win business faster. So ultimately, that's what we're here to do at the end of the day is sell software or sell our products and innovate fast and do it in a secure fashion. So that is why they use StackHawk, is because that is a competitive advantage to be able to test as you deploy. Another piece is, especially in fintech, is because that data can be so sensitive, they can have internal rules and regulations that say you cannot deploy until you test this thing for security vulnerabilities. And the CEO is saying, go faster. And those things are at odds. So if you're using a legacy DAST tool, it can literally take days to run. Like often people say, go on a Friday afternoon, and then they hope on Monday morning it didn't fall off and it actually completed the test. You cannot do that at today's pace of software delivery. So we have a fintech customer in the UK, and they're responsible for also providing services to other banks. And that is a very API-driven company. And they have to test every single one of those APIs very thoroughly, because it's not only their business, but also the services that they're providing to other banks with very sensitive information that they have to be testing. And they are an excellent StackHawk customer that has rolled out very broadly in their organization and are doing that constant testing to mitigate vulnerabilities that can actually be very, very costly, associated with that very both their customer base and data, but their very API-driven architecture.
That's an excellent example, right? Both healthcare and fintech, they are dealing with this sensitive data, and they really need to make sure that everything is well tested, no issues in production. So thanks,
Right.
Joni, for sharing that. Probably one of my last question is about your vision of the future of API security sector. Where do you think it's moving, and what's the role of StackHawk in shaping that future?
Yeah, it's interesting. When we founded the company in 2019, and we started doing, it was a very, at that time, the business model was a very inbound driven business model. So it was all about SEO, ads, and like generating inbound traffic. And at that time, in like early 2020, no one was searching for API security. And the kind of technology we were using was DAST, and everybody hated their DAST. And so we were like, okay, we're going to go to market as DAST. And what we started to see is all our RFPs started to shift, because even though somebody was shopping for a new DAST, what they were shopping for was API security testing. And this was the method that we were doing it. And the market has changed a lot since then. So now we know more. It's more of a conversation. And I think the role we play in this is, we have a very interesting company where I come from DevOps. My co-founder, Scott Gerlach, has been a practitioner and a CISO at both SendGrid. He was a practitioner running security teams at GoDaddy for 10 years. And he's very developer friendly, but also understands what it's like to sit in the seat. So it's this very interesting balance. But what we're finding is there's a lot of fear in the cybersecurity realm about both APIs, because they don't really understand oftentimes, and this is not a slight, I'm not trying to be rude, but how more modern software is built. And so it's a scary topic. It's like, oh, API security, like I don't really know. There's zombie APIs, and there's, whatever else, there's another one that they use, of like just how much risk is in it. But it's because they don't really understand. And so that's why we're trying, our role, I think, is to connect modern software development and those software engineers to the security person. So just like we're helping developers only pay attention to the most important things, we're trying to glean what's happening in engineering and pass the most important things over to security so that they know how to interact with those teams and get the right information under test. So I think API security has a long way to go. I think we're very early in the market. People are just now understanding sort of the pace of software, how it's built, how the internet is trafficked, and they're starting to put together more solutions to solve the problem. And then I think clearing up a little bit in the market, both the benefits and the differences in production-based API monitoring, and then what it is to actually secure and test those APIs before you deploy. And we have a lot of work to do there to both educate the market and help onboard customers to a more modern way of securing our software.
And that's a great note to end on. It's been an amazing pleasure to talk to you, and I look forward to having you back at the Prime U sometime soon. Thank you.
Thank you so much.